Monster Hunter has always been close to my heart, with each title bringing us a bunch of new content and challenges, but some of these challenges can be tough, and so hunters require builds to help take them on. So, I'm Darcblade with an anti-Omega DPS build for the bow. Now, as always, if you enjoy these videos and want to see more of them, consider leaving a like as well as subscribing to the channel, as they not only help me in terms of the YouTube algorithm, but they also help my mental health. Now, when it comes to Omega Planetes and Savage Omega Planetes, the hunt is not your traditional Monster Hunter hunt, as you have to adopt certain roles. When it comes to the bow, the best role it can really adopt is the DPS role. It can tank to a lesser degree, but it's not advisable. It's not optimal anyway. But in terms of sustained DPS, it's a great choice, allowing you to dish out a constant string of elemental damage to Omega Planetes, whilst at the same time giving you a defensive dodge that can help keep you alive. You are a little bit fragile if you do get hit, but hopefully with this build you should be able to combine elements of DPS, survival, and quality of life to help you get the hunt done. This build applies to both the normal version of Omega Planetes and the Savage version as well. So let's get into this. Now, first of all, for the armor, you'll need the Ray Sandhelm Gamma. You'll then need the Lagiacrus Mel Beta, the Ray Sandbraces Gamma, the Lagiacrus Coil Beta, and the Duna Wildgreaves Gamma. As for your charm, now you may have a better charm here if you are using one of the RNG charms. However, as I like to show off these builds using craftable charms, that means everyone can get the same charm, I've gone for a Fitness Charm 5. As for your mantles, I recommend the Rocksteady Mantle. We're primarily taking this for the Nursilla clone phase more than anything else. So when that spider appears, we'll put this mantle on for some uninterrupted DPS. As for your weapons, I've gone for the Artium bows, 1 Thunder, 1 Fire, with the reinforcement bonuses mainly focusing on elemental attack, but a bit of affinity or raw attack here is no big deal. I will say as well, when it comes to the bow, it does tend to favour sustained damage, so a constant damage output rather than burst damage, which when it comes to the Nursilla clone can make things a little bit tricky, in all honesty. Sometimes I will even switch out the fire bow if I feel I'm not doing enough damage with it. So keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to the decorations, we've got a lot to play around with. First of all, for the Thunder bow, we've gone for a crit jewel, a bulk crit element jewel, and a spread jewel. This will give us some points in critical boost, thunder attack, critical element, and power shots. Remember, for Omega Planetes itself, it's weak to thunder, that's why we're using a thunder bow. For the fire bow, I've gone for another critical jewel, a blaze crit element jewel, and another spread jewel, which is what we'll be using against the Nursilla clone, as it's weakest to fire. As for your armor, I've gone for Tenderizer jewels for weakness exploit, refresh jewel to max out stamina surge, jumping jewel to max out evade extender, protection jewels to max out divine blessing, a chain jewel for a point in burst, destroyer jewels for a few points in part breaker, a challenger jewel for an extra point in agitator, and then a fire resist jewel. This is purely optional, in all honesty. I just wanted to counter the negative fire resistance found on this build for a little bit of extra survivability. You can drop this if you want for something else like the shockproof jewel if you want to be more considerate of your allies. So if you've done what I've done here and you're using the Thunder bow, you'll have the following skills. First of all, you'll have crit boost at level 3, increasing the damage of our critical attacks, but this only applies to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental portion. You'll then have thunder attack at level 3, increasing the thunder rating and thus the thunder damage of this build. You'll then have critical element at level 1, which works like critical boost but applies to the elemental portion of an attack, and then you'll have power shots at level 1, increasing the damage of the bow's power and quick shots. If you're using the fire bow, on the other hand, you'll have critical boost at level 3, again increasing the damage of our attacks when they crit a monster. You'll then have fire attack at level 3, increasing the fire rating and thus the fire damage of this build. Critical element at level 1, which is a bit like critical boost but for the elemental portion of an attack, and then again power shots at level 1. As for the other skills found on this build, first of all, you'll have weakness exploit at level 5. This is a skill that when attacking monster weak points, or weak points that have wounds on, our affinity is increased up to a maximum of 50%. You'll then have Constitution at level 5. This is a result of the Fitness Charm. You can replace this if you wanted to, knocking it down to Constitution level 3, especially if you have another talisman that could potentially help this build. Constitution is a skill that basically reduces the stamina depletion when performing certain actions like firing the bow. If you do drop this down to level 3 though, you need to top up this build by using Dash Juice. You'll then have Divine Blessing at level 3, a wonderful survival skill that gives us a chance at taking reduced damage when we take a hit from a monster, potentially reducing hits by up to 50%. You'll then have Stamina Surge at level 3, another wonderful quality of life and stamina management skill for the bow that speeds up our stamina recovery time. Again, reducing the need for this build to use Dash Juice. Sometimes when fights are a little bit longer than normal, having to constantly drink Dash Juice can be a little bit of a annoyance, so having these quality of life stamina recovery skills is definitely helpful. You'll then have Evade Extender at level 3, a skill that increases the distance at which we evade and dodge. Now, whilst normally taking Evade Extender at level 3 is a little bit overkill for most hunts, when it comes to Omega Planetes, a lot of its telegraphed attacks, having Evade Extender at level 3 will allow us to completely get out of the way of them in a single dodge, thus adding to our survivability. The downside, especially when it comes to the bow and Evade Extender, is having more points in Evade Extender, or having Evade Extender at all, can potentially reduce our damage as it increases the time between shots when we're dash dancing. As in firing the bow, dashing, firing the bow, dashing, so on and so forth. But for Omega Planetes, and especially Savage Omega Planetes, Evade Extender I would strongly recommend. Anyway, next up is Quick Sheath, a byproduct of the armor we're using, but it's still a useful skill as it allows us to sheath our weapon more quickly. You'll then have Agitator at level 2, a skill, a buff that kicks in whenever a monster becomes enraged. When this happens, we'll gain bonus raw attack and base affinity. Would it be nice to get this higher? And you can potentially get this higher if you're using a different talisman. You'll then have Maximum Might at level 2, a byproduct of the armor and wasted skill on the bow. In all honesty, Maximum Might is a skill that increases our affinity whenever we have full stamina, but that will never be the case with the bow, so it's kind of wasted, like I said. You then have Part Breaker at level 2, a skill that allows us to break monster body parts more easily, as well as increasing the damage dealt when destroying wounds with focus strikes. But we've primarily taken this in order to potentially break Omega Planetes' front legs as quickly as possible, thus toppling it over for some massive damage from our allies so they can attack the antenna, although the bow itself doesn't really deal that much damage to the antenna itself. But on top of that, toppling a monster gives us a free opportunity to attack the monster, as well as potentially dropping the shield generator for our allies as well. You'll then have Burst at level 1, a skill that which we're continuously attacking a monster. It will gradually build up raw attack and elemental attack with this build. And then finally we'll have Fire Resistance at level 1, a skill that increases our fire resistance a little bit to help counter the negative fire resistance found on this build. We'll then have 3 set bonuses for this build. First of all is Radal's Voltage, Thunderous Roar level 1, which moderately extends the activation time for the Latent Power skill. But we're not using Latent Power on this build, so it's kind of wasted. You could get a Latent Power Talisman if you wanted to, which means you'll be able to take advantage of this. Latent Power is a skill that after a certain amount of time or a certain amount of damage taken will gain increased base affinity and reduced stamina consumption. You'll then have Leviathan's Fury, Azure Bolt, level 1, a skill that when we've attacked a monster a certain amount of times, will get a temporary increase to our affinity and a burst of thunder damage against the monster. And as Omega Planetes is weak to thunder, this is very nice. And then finally you'll have the Lord's Soul, Guts Tenacity, a skill that boosts our overall attack but lowers our defense. However, it gives us the chance to survive one lethal hit, to which afterwards it will boost our defense and resistances as well. So it is a little bit of a risk-reward set bonus, but it allows us to deal more damage, and should we survive that lethal hit, we'll gain increased defenses afterwards. So there we have it. That is the DPS bow build that I like to use against Omega Planetes and its Savage version. But it's not perfect. No build is. There are things that could be improved and skills that it lacks. But when it comes to the pros for this build, I would say its biggest pro is its damage output. Well, constant damage output, shall we say. Thanks to being able to utilize the elements quite well, having decent stamina skills, and the front legs being a good hit zone when it comes to Omega Planetes, we're able to rain down almost a constant string of damage against the monster. Which brings us on to our second pro, which is the stamina management skills like I mentioned. Not only allowing us to keep the attacks going, but also reducing the need for things like Dash Juice. And then finally, when it comes to this build, is the quality of life skills for this build. Having Divine Blessing coupled with Evade Extender and Guts, it adds to our survivability a little bit more and makes the hunts feel maybe a tiny bit more easier than they should be. But of course, there are cons. No build is perfect. I would say the biggest con for this build is, unfortunately, when it comes to the Nircilla clone, the bow can sometimes lack the burst damage needed to bring it down super quickly, especially if you are interrupted. And the other con is, unfortunately, your survivability is really dictated on your ability to read the battlefield and dodge attacks. Should you get hit, your only defense is really Divine Blessing. But that being said, we have lots of ways to avoid attacks like the Discerning Dodge, Evade Extender, and so on. So those are the pros and cons, but before I move on and finish this video up, I will say that the bow can technically tank Omega Planetes. However, it takes a lot to get its aggro with the bow, and on top of that, should you get said Ire, you really have to be on point with your Discerning Dodges. It can be done, but it's a little bit tricky, and you need to be locked in. Regardless though, this is a fun build to use against Omega Planetes. I like the constant string of damage it can deal to the monster, and so long as you go for the front legs, it should help you bring success in your hunts. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you an anti-Omega build for the bow in Monster Hunter Wilds. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.